Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Tinker Talk, a weekly podcast that will soon be filling the world with bucket loads of football-related joy. Or an argument. I'm Josh Andrews, and I'm joined as ever by the Xavi to my Iniesta, Matthew David. You can speak.
I can speak. I'd rather have been Iniesta, but cool. Hey.
Yeah, well, style over substance. I feel like that was, your whole thing.
Right.
This week, we will be looking at two big matches in the Champions League, the end of an era at Barcelona, and a moment of controversy that happened in Holland this past week. But before all that, Matthew, Gary Neville had some choice words to say about the fans talking on Arsenal Fan TV.
He did indeed. Yes. So basically, he pretty much called them an embarrassment.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly criticising Arsene Wenger and, the whole Wenger out brigade. And his point was basically that if it was any other manager, for example, if Klopp at Liverpool was getting top four every year and all that, then he would be lauded, whereas Wenger, because he's been doing it for so long, is getting criticised, and he was just saying that the way they go about it is not really... Well, I mean, he said it was embarrassing.
Sure. I think one of the points that were made when he was going on that sort of tirade was that a lot of the Arsenal fan mentality was very much, he's been here, he being Wenger, has been here for 20 years, and over the last, say, 10 of those years, not enough has happened for the club pushing forward into becoming this sort of like great big superpower that they were supposed to be once the Emirates was built and everything. And there just hasn't been enough progression going forward. And the fans are probably just getting a little bit bored of that. What would you think?
I think that's perfectly fair. Before we go on, do you agree with a particular side, or do you think there's both valid points? What kind of way would you lean with the discussion?
Well, I mean, I think it's... I think we can both agree it's very unprofessional of somebody to sort of like call a group of fans an embarrassment, but I think when you're talking about people basically slating Wenger every single time Arsenal have a bad result, I don't think there really is any defending that, but at the same time I can understand the frustration.
I mean, I can understand the frustration as well. I think the problem you mentioned about, Arsenal meant to become a superpower with the new stadium and all that.
Sure.
And it is a common kind of counter to that argument that comes up quite a lot. But the way football's changed during the time from the announcement that Arsenal were building a new stadium to the time when it was actually built, during that time, Abramovich came to the Premier League.
Sure.
Which kind of changed the landscape long term. You look at it now, look at the amount of money being spent, and clubs, Man City, have kind of climbed their way to the top using money. So it's become a lot more difficult for Arsenal, and I don't think Wenger really expected that at the time. So it's just, I think I can understand the frustration and understand that what was meant to happen hasn't happened, but I mean, Arsenal have no kind of given right to be winning the title or, being at the kind of top. Has to be earned like everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, of course they don't have the given right to it. I mean, they weren't winning the title every year before the Emirates. They were just always in the race, which I think is the problem that Arsenal fans typically have now. They haven't felt like they were in a legitimate title race probably since 2008.
I suppose that's probably fair. But then again, when Arsenal used to be in the title race every season, you look at the number of teams in it, it was between 2 and 3. Now, any of the top 6 could be considered to be in the title race. I know Chelsea are running away with it this year, but just kind of in general, it's that close at the moment, and the kind of quality of the teams is close. So I think the praise isn't given to Wenger for keeping Arsenal up there while the money has kind of accelerated other teams' growth.
Right.
Whether or not that's enough is obviously open to interpretation. Obviously, a lot of Arsenal fans don't think so. Gary Neville obviously does. What would your view on that be?
I mean, I think it's funny because there's always something that Arsene Wenger's always praised about the players that he's had over the years. But I'm sort of the mentality that Arsenal haven't had a winning mentality for a number of years now, and I think that might just be down to a lack of ability of him to necessarily motivate the players to actually go and get these, Premier League titles, Champions League victories, and all the rest of that, because you just don't see the fighting spirit when they're out on the pitch anymore. I know Sanchez always, looks like he's giving it all, and he's always all fired up and everything. You see it occasionally with players like Chamberlain and whatnot, but you don't see it from the full team like you used to back in 2004.
Do you think that's down to Wenger, though? Or do you think that's down to the kind of player that Arsenal have been bringing in?
I think you can't exclude Wenger out from that second point, which, you talk about the players that Arsenal have been bringing in. Wenger's been bringing in those players.
That is true, but he also brought in the team in 2004, which had, well, the majority of the team of 2004, which had a ridiculous amount of spirit and fight in them. And it was the same manager, so I don't really understand why that would have changed over time. So I don't know if it's just if Wenger's not got the energy and enthusiasm anymore, or if the quality of player is just not as high a standard. I'm not sure what that is.
I don't think the quality of players is the issue. I think we've discussed this at length off the podcast before now when we've been talking about how we think this is one of the best squads Arsenal have had in a long time. But you talk about the sort of energy and enthusiasm. Wenger's he's not a young guy anymore, and maybe that's just what Arsenal need. They need somebody new. They need somebody fresh. He's been there for 20 years. How much more can he have left in the tank?
I mean, it's a valid question, but I mean, if you look at Alex Ferguson going into the later years, he kept on winning. So saying about the kind of age thing, it's obviously a valid kind of discussion point, but whether or not it's actually completely relevant is probably open for interpretation, open for debate.
Sure.
I don't know. It's always a tricky one because people always think the grass is greener. So I think that's probably the counter that Neville had, talking about this kind of almost this kind of Arsenal fans getting bored of Wenger and everyone in England getting bored of him because he's been here for so long. It's like people always want something fresh and some kind of change. Like, do you think a change at the top, not to get into the whole discussion about who, but do you think a change at the top is something that would kind of reinvigorate Arsenal?
Yes, and I don't have anything really more to say to that. I just think after so many years where results have been relatively similar, the squad hasn't changed a whole lot in the last few years. And okay, Wenger's recently got a few FA Cup titles under his belt, but they're not the Premier League and they're not the Champions League. And okay, Arsenal aren't quite that sort of big European juggernaut that, and I suppose they never really were, but you talk about Arsenal, historically they are a team who have always been sort of Premier League title challengers, but they haven't been in the last number of years under Arsene Wenger, and that's obviously just, I feel like that is what could help, is just a change at the top.
Do you think the calls for a kind of change will increase after the result today?
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't think there'll be too many people on the, screaming from the top of the stadium, screaming Wenger in after losing 5-1.
Again.
Yeah.
A woeful performance. It's the kind of thing that Arsenal they keep doing in the Champions League, and I suppose that's something else that kind of a fresh impetus might, or Arsenal fans at least would hope would kind of arrest.
Sure. Again, the players didn't really look up to it. There were some bright moments in the first half with Sanchez being a good outlet for them, but beyond that, Arsenal looked pretty dreadful.
It's just a complete gulf in class between the two teams.
Sure.
I don't think Arsenal looked kind of fit to tie Bayern's shoelaces at times. And I don't even think it was that Bayern were playing phenomenally well, because I think both of us have seen them play a lot better than they did against Arsenal tonight, but just swipe the floor with them.
Sure. I mean, you said, again, referring to the 5-1, I think it was the 5-1 last season, where I thought they blew Arsenal out of the park.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think they were phenomenal. It was in the group stage last season, wasn't it?
Yeah, the second leg.
There's no legs in a group stage.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, in the match at the Allianz. It was... although I think the difference there as well, I mean, like I say, Bayern didn't look like they were didn't look like they had to be in top gear today. But I think the difference with last year's is that last year's they were getting a bit of revenge for something, whereas this year it was just straight out the bat, bam, done.
Yeah. And, to follow up on them not being at their best today, I mean, you look at the players that weren't playing today. Boateng, Ribery, Muller was on the bench. They weren't playing what you might consider a full-strength team, and whilst Arsenal didn't have, say, Cazorla out on the pitch, I mean, other than that, it was a full-strength team that was available, pretty much.
I mean, we were discussing this during the match, but I think we agreed there's not a single Arsenal player who would get into Bayern's starting 11 if everyone's fit.
I agree. As much as I think a lot of Arsenal fans like to think that Sanchez and Ozil are these absolute top 10 player in the world sort of players. I mean, as good as they both are, I don't think they'd get into Bayern's team.
Certainly not. But I think that just kind of shows how far behind Arsenal kind of really are.
Sure.
Kind of take a lot to get them to the point that the Bayern have kind of climbed themselves to, because I think that the pattern with Bayern as well, certainly, their recruitment has continued to be top-notch over a long time. You look at their summer activity, they brought in arguably the best defender in Germany.
Sure.
In Hummels, they brought in Renato Sanchez. Hasn't really worked out as well as they might have hoped. But you put them on top of the players they already have.
Yeah.
It's just they step up their quality time after time after time. It's just like a system.
Well, yeah, I mean, they are the top team in Germany. You would expect them to be able to bring in these top players time after time. And there's less need for them to necessarily compete for these bigger players, because you talk about a team like Arsenal where they have to compete with a number of teams on their level to get these players into that club, whereas Bayern Munich can just, well, they're Bayern Munich.
Hey, want to come play for us? Yeah, okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that helps with recruitment, but at the same time, that's not really any excuse for that gulf in quality, I don't think.
No.
And certainly not that lack of fighting spirit.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think Arsenal looked lost after Koscielny went off.
Yeah.
I'd not to say that the game wasn't going that way anyway, but I think that was when the scratch became a wound.
Sure. I mean, it's an easy thing to say, Arsenal lose their best defender, then they, concede 4 goals. It's easy to blame it on that, but the whole team looked pretty down pretty much from the beginning.
Yeah. It's true. There wasn't really That's the kind of game where you'd want a team to go out and think, you know what, we can take this by the scruff of the neck. We can fight for this. We can play our football, try and impose ourselves, and grab a win. It wasn't like that at all from Arsenal. It didn't look like there was a plan.
No. Again, if you want to bring that back to whether there needs to be a change at the top, I mean, that's got to be down to the manager, surely.
Yeah, definitely. Whether or not there was a plan. Obviously, you'd have to have been in the training sessions and everything to know that, the discussions. It could just be that there was a plan that wasn't followed, or there was a plan that, I mean, looking at it, I couldn't work out what that plan would have been, but there could have been a plan that, didn't work.
Sure.
It certainly didn't look like that was the case. It just looked like, go out and yeah, knock yourselves out. Except they didn't.
Play the best football you can.
If that was the team talk, they certainly didn't listen.
No. And just to take this away, because we've been talking about this for a while and we can talk about it forever, but that's not the only match where a plan that you would have assumed would have been in place wasn't perfectly executed. How about the 4-0 PSG versus Barcelona?
Now that was a plan perfectly executed.
Ah.
Yeah.
We were looking at two of the other teams then, weren't we?
Nice segue.
Yeah.
Yeah, PSG were phenomenal in that game. I think that's. I think any kind of Arsenal fans watching that would have been like, can we have Emery, please?
Yeah, I think they're probably more likely to be drooling over not drooling, but angry at the fact that they didn't get Draxler after all this time.
Yeah, after his however many windows are being linked with Arsenal, he's now at PSG, and he made Sergio Roberto look like a preschooler.
Yeah, he did.
I'm not sure I've ever seen someone do that many stepovers in a single game.
I don't know, Sturridge used to do it back when he was at Chelsea.
I don't know if they were deliberate.
Ah.
But yeah, it was it was incredible to watch. I think that was Emery at Sevilla obviously kind of got a reputation for the big games in Europe. I know it was in the Europa League, but you don't win it three times in a row without having that kind of mentality.
No, of course not.
And knowing what to do in certain situations. It just looked like PSG were on another level in terms of their versatility and everything. I know it's not been going perfectly for them in the league, and I think they're 3 points behind at the moment. But it looks like a lot of work's been going in, and it's starting to kind of come together now. Sure.
I'm not sure if we discussed this on a podcast last week, the week before, or not at all. But we were talking quite recently about Kante being a very unfair player.
Yeah.
But, if you want to talk about another one, how about Matuidi?
I don't think there's a position on the pitch that you couldn't put Matuidi and think, you know what, he'll be a good player there.
Yeah, I fully agree. The guy can cover so much ground and he's so versatile.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was... I'll get onto this point a bit more in a moment, but I lost count of how many times he got the ball off Messi, gave it to someone on the wing, ended up as like a left forward almost. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to just be a kind of move that, PSG have actually done that a lot this season. You'll see Matuidi being as a kind of defensive mid, and then all of a sudden he's in left wing offering support to the striker.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've kind of got that down to an art now, but yeah, he's a super player.
Fantastic. The kind of player I think would fit into almost any team in the world, and he'd be one of their best players, without doubt.
I mean, I think Barca probably would have been at that match thinking, can we have him?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those rare cases in football where you run out of superlatives for a player. And the thing that's ridiculous is, as good as he was, there was every player in the PSG team was near enough at the same level that he was playing at.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, Messi, I've never seen lose the ball as many times as he did. He couldn't handle them. Yeah,
it seemed like a lot of the time Messi was just sort of trying to find little pockets of space, and then every time he sort of found it, he was being closed down by about 3 different players, and there was just nothing he could have really done about it.
Completely agree. It was a masterclass in terms of kind of how to press, how to organise yourself defensively, how to win the ball back, how to counter. Do you think Barca made it easier for them than they could have?
Well, when you look back at Barcelona teams of the last well, let's look at the Barcelona team from say 2011, the last sort of like great generation of Barcelona team. That team was an absolute like that's the team you'd have wanted to watch to get an idea of how to press. I mean, I know they were lauded for their passing play and all that, but the amount of pressing that team used to do to get the ball back whenever they lost it was insane. And whilst PSG didn't necessarily press that hard, when they did press, they pressed just as well, if not better, than the sort of team that, would have done that. And Barcelona just, they sat off PSG for the entirety of that game. They gave them way too much space.
Yeah, it was kind of ridiculous to see how often Verratti picked the ball up in the middle of the pitch and had no one near him.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about one of the best sort of young passers and playmakers that Europe has to offer right now, and he was just offered more time and space than anyone.
I think what's surprising, if there was any team who you think would know how to deal with a player like that, it would be Barcelona. They're the ones who've had the players like that. You mentioned, you mentioned Xavi and Iniesta earlier.
Yeah.
You'd think that in training over however many years, they would have been thinking, okay, this is how Xavi and Iniesta will be stopped. This is how they get around it. But first and foremost, they'll have this is how they'll get stopped in their mind. But it didn't look like that. Verratti just he could have done roulettes the whole game. And
I mean, that might have been even more entertaining. But
yeah.
I mean, you're not going to turn down a 4-0 victory, would you? As a fan,
no. Yeah, it was an incredible performance from PSG. But you mentioned about the kind of 2011 Barcelona team as obviously a fantastic team.
Yeah. Do
you think that the kind of that quality in a Barcelona team, that style, that's kind of effectiveness as well with the times of results, do you think that's going to be kind of do you think that's a thing of yesteryear now? Do you think Barcelona's time has kind of come and is now starting to go?
Well, I mean, you can talk about, whether they're, big sort of like great. I mean, that 2011 team was like a generation of players that just all came up through one system. And obviously there were players here and there that didn't. But you talk about players like, Busquets and Pedro and players like that, where they were all sort of brought into this team that already had the likes of Xavi, Iniesta, Messi had come through those rags at this point. And, Puyol was still one of the best defenders in the world. And obviously that team just had the perfect sort of balance that allowed for the way that they played to just be executed week in, week out with no real problems. Now you look at that team and you could point out in a number of areas where they're just not as strong as they once were. And granted, they have still, I think, undoubtedly the best front three in the world, but I mean, you look at their midfield. You got Busquets, who is, in fairness, one of the best, probably the best defensive midfielder in the world right now. But then you look at Gomez and Iniesta, who are the two that started with him, and you think, Iniesta 5 years ago, and obviously you're going to say that, 5 years ago, was a much better player than he is now. Yeah. And you look at the likes of Andre Gomez, and it's like, they'd much rather have Fabregas or Thiago or somebody that they had in between that 5 years, that 2011 team and now, as opposed to a player like Andre Gomez. And Andre Gomez is a good player, don't get me wrong, but he's not on that same level.
I'd agree with that. I think, and not to keep bringing every kind of discussion back to recruitment, but it's another one where it's a completely valid point. If you look at the amount of money that Barcelona spent in the summer and the kind of players they brought in, they brought in Andre Gomez, they brought back Denis Suarez, they brought in Lucas Digne, they brought in Samuel Umtiti. Two of the players played against PSG. They were both completely, just terrible performances from both of them. They didn't look ready for a match of that kind of calibre. When you're at Barcelona, you need to be ready for anything. You need to be prepared to go into a game against anyone, have a fight, win it, play the ball, distribute it quickly, be comfortable. Umtiti wasn't, and he was playing at centre back. They got destroyed by Cavani, Di Maria, Draxler. Gomez, I can't really remember him being on the ball. If he was, it probably would have been for a couple of seconds and they would have lost it. But I think that the one that emphasises it the most for me, Lucas Digne, who's their left back, they signed him from PSG. He was PSG's third choice, and that was behind Maxwell, who used to play for Barca, and they got rid of him because they didn't need him anymore.
Sure.
So the fact that they're signing someone who is behind one of their former players in a pecking order at PSG, I think says quite a lot about kind of their recruitment in the summer.
I completely agree. And actually, I mean, when you look at recruitment, you look at the sort of like the way that Barcelona have typically done things in the past. They've always looked at their youth system. They've always tried to sort of like develop their own young players. And ironically, this game, you saw that from PSG when Kimpembe basically had Barcelona's front three in his back pocket.
Yeah, certainly. And Rabiot in midfield was superb as well.
Yeah.
And, they've both been... Well, I think Rabiot was signed from someone else, I can't remember who. But, they were developed for a large part at PSG, and that's kind of what we associate with Barcelona.
Yeah.
But in Barcelona's team, they had, Roberto, who didn't look comfortable at all.
No.
As decent as he's kind of been at right back, he's not really good enough to be playing for Barcelona there long term, I don't think.
Well, he's no Dani Alves, that's for sure.
No, definitely not. Piqué, who obviously came through a long time ago. Jordi Alba, who came through a long time ago. Iniesta came through a long time ago. Busquets has come through a long time ago. Messi came through. There's nothing fresh that's going to go into that first team there, which I think's not something you could have said at any time really in the recent past. Whereas PSG look like kind of they've got it right. Kimpembe, although he's very young, he looked like a phenomenal centre half in that game.
Yep, I agree, and I think it will be very interesting to see how he develops as a footballer as the years progress.
Yeah, certainly. Sometimes when we're having our discussions and we find something that's not maybe such a kind of big topic, but something that kind of really catches our interest. I mean, there was certainly one of them this week. What happened?
Ajax were playing Sparta Rotterdam in the Eredivisie, and Veltman was on the right wing, and one of his teammates went down injured, and Veltman signalled to his opposite number that obviously there was a player injured, and as the Rotterdam player turns around, Veltman just sprints past him, whips the ball into the box, as if it's, just a completely fine thing to do that would happen in any other game. And there's been a lot of discussion on whether that's really unsporting or just incredibly clever. And Veltman's had his say on the whole thing, and he said that it was not perhaps the most beautiful thing to do, but it was just something very clever and nothing more. What's your take on the whole thing?
I think he's incredibly cheeky. It's probably, we talked about this before we started, and
we did.
I was saying about how it was unsportsmanlike and all this stuff, and I still think that. But I think cheeky, I thought of it now, and it's the perfect word to describe it.
I don't disagree.
He's taking the mickey,
yeah.
Basically, is the gist.
He is.
I do think it's not sportsmanlike. I do think it should have been pulled back. Just because, if someone did that to him, he wouldn't be happy about it. It's not really... You want to have... Say Ajax scored from that. Right. Could you imagine the fallout?
I could. However, I do think it's fair to point out, like, if the injured player was a Sparta Rotterdam player,
right?
If the injured player was on the opposite team, then I can understand the backlash, because you're taking advantage of a situation and taking the mickey out of it. But this was a situation where the guy who was injured was playing for Ajax, so playing on wasn't necessarily an advantage. It was just, okay, he's fooled this one player, so it's 10. It's one player out of the out of the equation for Rotterdam, but there's also already one player out of the equation for Ajax, so it's sort of, in a weird way, 10v10.
I don't think that is a valid excuse, really. I know that wasn't kind of what you were... I know you weren't trying to kind of excuse it with that, but that's like saying, you know what, I picked him up and threw him off the pitch because it made the numbers even. It doesn't...
Well, that would have been a bit more fun to watch, to be fair.
I think he probably would have got a card for that.
Probably.
No, I just think, it was sporting of the Rotterdam defender to turn around maybe a bit. Well, I can't even say it was naive because players don't do what Veltman did.
No, that is fair, but at the same time, the ball wasn't out of play, and more often than not, the ball will be out of play before play completely stops. Do you know what I mean?
That is true, unless the ref's kind of called up or something like that.
Yeah, and the ref hadn't done that. The ball went in. It was play on.
Do you know what? He's effectively pointed at like something that's not there and been like, "Hey, look, it's a flying saucer," and he's been like, "What? Where?" And Veltman's just gone.
Right, but do you know what? Using that though, let's say that Traore wasn't down, injured. Right. And Veltman just pointed at something that wasn't there.
Right.
So is that an unsportsmanly thing to do, or is that just cheeky?
That's a fair point. I don't think making someone look somewhere else would normally work. I don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, imagine, okay, so you're shaping up to defend against someone. You got your body in the right position. If someone points off in another direction, generally you wouldn't be like, "Oh, what's that?" I actually turned around then. You might have heard that.
I did.
I don't know what I was looking for, but no, I don't know. I suppose if it didn't work, then there wouldn't be the discussion about it. We wouldn't be talking about it now. And the more I'm thinking about it, the funnier it's kind of getting to me.
Well, it's the kind of thing that you'd see in like a school playground, isn't it? It's like, oh, look at that! Look at what this guy's doing. Oh no, I've gone. Bye bye.
So,
see you later. Yeah.
I think in a professional football match, yeah, it might be clever, and it was clever, but I also don't think that's something that's kind of we should encourage this. So, I know we've kind of discussed if Bertrand Traore wasn't down injured, whether it would be different, whether it would be like, hey, look at that, blah blah blah. Let's say hypothetically Bertrand Traore was down and had a broken leg or something like that.
Right.
What would your view be on it then?
I guess. I mean, it's still the Ajax player, and if it's a goal, but Traore has a broken leg, I don't really see how that actually makes a difference.
What do you mean?
I mean, you look at... So, Traore's gone down, he has a broken leg.
Right.
And, yes, you've done the whole, oh, look, there's a guy with a broken leg. Oh, look, I've gone 5 yards ahead and I'm about to put the ball in. If that ends up in a goal, I don't really see how that's any different to if he hasn't got a broken leg. I don't know, he doesn't in this instance. It's not put too much emphasis on this, but I don't see how the degree of an injury makes any sort of added impetus on whether something like this is more or less unsporting, because there's no way he would have known regardless.
That's true to an extent. I think it's just the kind of exploiting the situation that, like I say, it's cheeky, it's funny. I just don't think that kind of thing sits well with me particularly.
That's fair enough. And to be fair, Veltman has said post that, in his sort of apology / making an excuse, depends on how you want to look at it, that he's not going to do it again because he doesn't think it'll ever work again. So
yeah, I think that's just
I think that's pretty cheeky in itself.
You know, that's like one of those apologies where it's like, I'm sorry because I got caught.
Well,
he's not apologising or saying, you know what, I probably shouldn't have done that. He's just like, well, it happened, and I'd do it again if it would work again.
Well, maybe that's the sort of thing that we perhaps shouldn't encourage. But if it works the one time, it worked the one time. It didn't. There was no goal.
Let's just be...
I think we can leave it at that, to be honest.
I just wanted one more point on that. Let's just have a ridiculous hypothetical situation here.
Go on.
If in football, pointing off in the distance at an injured player and saying, hey, look, he's injured, and then someone turns around, if that became a step over, or a step over equivalent, could you imagine how boring football would be? It would just be everyone turning around and looking off in a distance.
Fair, but people have found ways to deal with step overs. I feel like they could find ways of not turning around when somebody points at an injured player.
I suppose that's probably fair.
This is getting a little bit ridiculous now. I think we should leave that point there and just move on.
Yeah. Although, you know, that was quite funny.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Do you have a question for me?
I do. And this sort of ties in with the sort of unsporting or more unprofessional behaviour and linking into one of the teams that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
So, on the 29th of August, 2009...
Oh, God.
Arsene Wenger got sent to the stands at Old Trafford for unprofessional conduct, or as Gordon Strachan said on Match of the Day, for kicking a plastic bottle.
Right.
What happened on the pitch that made Wenger kick said bottle?
Oh dear. Was this in a game that I wouldn't like to bring up the score of?
I'm really not sure what you mean by that, if I'm honest.
Was this in the 8-2?
No.
Okay.
That was in 2011, I think.
Right. Why did Wenger... Oh, Wenger could have kicked a bottle for any reason.
This was the game in which there was the whole Wenger being sent to the stands, and there's that sort of famous photo of him
standing there.
Standing there, sort of...
Arms spread.
Yeah.
Since I don't know, I'm just... Could he not get his jacket to zip up?
I'm pretty sure his jacket was zipped up when he was standing in the stand. I might be wrong about that.
Okay, well, I think I'm probably wrong.
You are wrong. He kicked a plastic bottle because Arsenal were disallowed a goal for offside that would have put them 2-0 up against Man United at Old Trafford before half-time.
Was it offside?
I believe so.
Okay, since your questions have been really difficult to answer for me, I've got one that's going to be equally difficult for you.
Brilliant.
Can you tell me, before PSG,
right,
the last 3 teams, and I'll include friendlies in this, to score 4 goals against Barcelona?
Couldn't have just asked me the last one. The last one I know.
You do, which is why I didn't ask you that.
Yeah, brilliant. No, I mean the last one was Liverpool.
Yep.
Before that, ugh. I mean, since I gave you a date for mine, can you give me the dates of the games?
I can tell you the other 2 were last season.
Both of them were last season.
Yes.
Competitive matches?
Yes.
Oh dear. Right. I'm going to say... Oh, what am I going to say?
I'm hoping some club names.
Yeah, I mean, that is the plan, isn't it? I'm just trying to remember, like, competitions, and... Because I watched a lot of Barcelona in the Champions League, I'm trying to run through those matches first.
I'll help you out. Neither of them were in the Champions League.
Ah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Right, so... Liverpool, I'm going to say, because I know that one's true. I'm wrong, but Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid.
Do you want to have a guess how many you got out of 3?
Did I get 1 out of 3?
You did.
Brilliant.
Yep, so it was Liverpool, who obviously won 4-0 in pre-season.
Yep.
The last team before that was Celta Vigo, who beat them 4-1 in La Liga.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 month before that, it was Bilbao, who beat them 4-0 in the Supercopa.
Oh, God, I remember the Bilbao match, actually.
Yep, which they went on to win 5-1 on aggregate.
Yeah.
I think that about wraps it up.
Yeah, nobody wins the mini quiz thing this week. We're going to need to think of some slightly easier questions.
That's a good idea.
Or we can just, keep throwing out the really ridiculous ones, and then when one of us gets it right, it's like, oh my god, big shark.
No, I just think it's a bit demoralising.
Ah, okay. Well, I'm sorry about that.
And on that sour note... Right. Hope you guys have enjoyed this week's episode. If you'd like to hear us every week, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, like on Facebook, follow on Twitter. You can also subscribe on iTunes. You can follow on SoundCloud. We're pretty much everywhere, so just links in the description.
Insert a sound effect of people celebrating here. Yeah. All right, guys. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.